Hi, my name is Jana at Lehman's, and today we are going to be making one of my favorite holiday dishes. We're making a pumpkin pie from scratch. So this is one of the first things I ever learned how to make with my mom. So this is a recipe that is very dear to me, and I am so excited to be able to share this with you and talk you through my process. So I know a pie crust can be very intimidating, but I promise you, with a little bit of practice, it is not. So I'm gonna tie up my hair, wash my hands, because washing your hands is very important when you're cooking, and we'll get started. So ingredient-wise, what we're going to use is 1.3 cups of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 cup of shortening. And I know you can use either butter or shortening. I prefer shortening, but you can also use 1/2 cup of softened butter as well. Start by adding our 1.3 cups of flour into the bowl. And now we're going to add our 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to take my rubber spatula and then just kind of mix this around a little bit to get that salt and flour incorporated together. So now that that is combined, we're going to add our shortening and/or butter. Now is the part where we're going to cut our butter and/or shortening into the flour. So there are two ways you can do this. You can either take 2 butter knives and cut your blob of butter and/or shortening, or we're going to use the method that I enjoy using, which is using a good old pastry cutter, which you can find at lemans.com or in store. The way I like to do this is I like to take my pastry cutter and kind of drag it through the shortening and then dip it into the flour. So this way, it kind of helps the shortening not to stick. And also, I should have warned you beforehand, this is gonna get a little messy. So this is why we washed our hands to begin with. If you need to wash your hands again, wash your hands again. So we are going to slowly combine everything together with the pastry cutter. And I'm making sure to press down on those little chunks of shortening to get everything cut up and mixed together. So what we're looking for is a very nice and even mixture of shortening and flour. So that way, when we roll out our dough, everything is gonna be nice and flat and even. And when you bite into your crust, you're gonna get an even amount of flake and of flour and just good pie crustiness. So my shortening pieces are becoming a nice, small-ish, uniform size. And if you notice, the color has started to take on just like an even, nice and yellowy, kind of buttery hue, which is exactly what we're looking for. I think that looks good. So we are going to move on to adding our water. I highly recommend doing this next step with a fork. So we're going to add 3 tablespoons of cold water to our pie crust. Now, the colder the water, the better. This is something my mom taught me. I'm gonna use tap water. So I'm actually going to rinse off my finger and wash my hands again, because clean hands and a clean kitchen means happy hands and a happy kitchen. And cold water is very important, because if you use warm water, that's going to melt your butter or your shortening, and that's going to make a very sticky dough. And we want flaky, not sticky. Now that our water is cold, we're going to add each tablespoon one by one, stirring in between. That is mixed in. I prefer using a fork to do this step, but that's just me. You can use a rubber spatula if you have one, if you would like to. But I feel like the fork helps the dough to combine a little bit better. So now we're going in for tablespoon number 2. So I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of water. Shut that off. Perfect. And do one last stir. So I'm now going to prep my work surface to roll this out. So I'm going to set this dough aside for a second. And I have a little chunk of wax paper. Trust the process on this. So I'm going to take just a little dab of water, kind of spread it on my work surface, and then set my wax paper on top. So the water is going to help the wax paper stick to your surface. So when you're rolling out your dough, the wax paper isn't going everywhere. You have a stable surface to work on. I'm going to sprinkle the counter with flour. Need to grab the flour real quick. So I have my flour and my rolling pin set aside. And I'm going to take just a little bit of flour. What I'm going to do now is start to kind of squish this dough together. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to roll it out later. So I'm going to get this into kind of a lump of dough, and then I'm going to take it and just plop it right in the middle and get all of that excess out. And set this bowl aside, because we will use this bowl again for our filling. So that way it's a little less mess. You don't have to dirty two bowls. We're gonna use the same bowl for our filling. So we're gonna set this aside and clean it out later. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that the dough is kind of centered on this wax paper. And then just kind of with my hands start to form a circle and make sure that all of that shortening is starting to stick together a little bit. And now I'm going to take just a little bit more flour and just kind of tap that on the top. You can also, whatever flour's left on your hands, you can kind of just shimmy that on your rolling pin so that way it reduces sticking on your rolling pin. So starting from the center and kind of working your way out, I'm not putting too much pressure on the dough. I'm just kind of spreading it out, trying to get this dough ball flattened. So once I get this started, because I'm starting to see a major crack right here, so I'm going to be very careful around here and make sure I get enough dough over there to kind of fix that crack. So if you need to and you notice that your dough is starting to stick, you can also, which that just happened right there, take a little bit more flour, just sprinkle just a tiny bit on the top, just to make sure that is non-stick. And also you can use this time to kind of evaluate the thickness of your dough. I'm noticing over here in this section, it's a little bit thicker than it is over here. So I'm gonna try to do is take the excess dough from here and kind of push it this way. Because again, we want this to be as even as possible. Okay, so I think we are at a point I can kind of start getting a little rough with it and getting this real flat and smooth. So that is looking pretty good. Notice there's a crack over here. I'm just gonna kind of massage that and get that kind of pressed in. So now I'm gonna take kind of some of these extra kind of flaky bits, just kind of patch that hole right there. There we go. So I think this is a little small, but I'm going to grab my pie plate and measure. I'm very excited to use this pan. It is enameled cast iron, which I personally have not used before, so I'm very excited to have the opportunity to try this out. So the enameled coating means that it's going to be non-stick for sure, and the cast iron is going to ensure an even heating for your pie crust, so that way when your pie crust comes out, it'll be nice and golden and flaky. I'm going to take my pie pan, flip it over, and notice that beautiful embossing on the bottom of this pan. So what I'm looking for is about an inch of space around the pie pan, which means I think I can go a little bit wider on the sides here. Just take another second and kind of manipulate that dough and get that where I want it to. So there are several different ways to get your crust transferred from counter to pan. So usually I do this with a glass pie pan or an aluminum or stainless steel pie pan. We're going to see how the cast iron works. So what I like to do is take the pan and get it as centered as possible and just slowly set that down. Now here comes the fun part. I'm gonna take my wax paper, gonna lift it up just enough to get my hand under there, and I'm gonna press that dough into the bottom of the pan, kind of sandwich everything in between my hands, and on 3, we're gonna flip. 1, 2, 3. Ooh, it worked. Wonderful. So I'm gonna take some of that flour and push it out of the way. And now I'm just gonna take the corners of the wax paper and start to kind of manipulate the dough into the pan. So I'm going to slowly peel this off. Kind of let that sink and settle into the pan. Okay, so I was a little off with my centering, but that is just fine. I'm just gonna push everything in here. And what I like to do is make sure I have enough over the side, so that way I have enough dough to work with for when we flute the edge. So I'm gonna take some of these pieces that fell off, just kind of squish them on. I'm just gonna keep continuing to squish and kind of push and just get that crust all settled in that pan. That looks good. I'm gonna take a knife and I'm going to cut around the edges to cut the excess dough off. So for the handles, I'm just gonna guess. It's not an exact science. But I'm just going to drag the blade of my knife around the edge to get all of that excess dough away. And watch your fingers. We don't want any accidents happening in the kitchen. So, I'm going to set this aside a second, and I'm going to clean up. Because remember, clean kitchen is a happy kitchen. Now we are ready to start fluting. So, if you don't know, fluting on a pie crust is the little wavy bit around the edge of your pie crust. So you don't have to do this, but I prefer to do it because I think it looks really nice. So, what we're gonna do is we're going to take the edge of our pie crust, and remember we left that edge. So we're gonna take and just kind of pinch it together so there's that little raised bit. And we're gonna do this around the whole pie. So that is why we left just that little bit extra, and we made sure that we had enough dough to hang over the edge. So I'm just going to keep turning and pinching and turning and pinching. So I noticed there's a thin spot right here. There's a little extra dough at the bottom, so I'm just gonna cheese it. Because again, this is cooking, we're having fun. The holidays are about having fun and making food to bring people together. So, and it's little things like that that I think really add the love into your pie. Okay, so I'm just about finished pinching my edge. So you can leave your pie crust like this, which I think looks beautiful already, but I'm gonna take it just a step farther and add that wave, which with this pie pan, it already has that wave built into it. To start off, I'm just going to pinch 2 sides of the dough and then just kind of twist. So that creates a little wave. So then what I'm gonna do is put my thumb in this wave here, my forefinger here, and then just kind of press and scoop around my pointer finger. And then just kind of keep doing that. You can kind of already see it start to form. What I'm doing is taking my fingers and using that as kind of a guide and a mold to kind of get that nice little wave. So now that we are back at the beginning, look at that! That is a gorgeous pie crust ready for filling. I'm just going to kind of massage the bottom of my pan to get any residue off, because if there's any pie crust or flour stuck to the bottom of this pie pan, it's going to end up burning in the oven and you're going to set off the fire alarm, and we don't want that either. So now that our pie crust is done and set aside and ready to go, we're going to work on our pumpkin pie filling. So the ingredients that we're going to use for our pie filling are a 15-ounce can of 100% pure pumpkin, 2 large eggs, which these happen to be farm fresh. We're going to use a cup and a half of whole milk, which I put it in the pumpkin puree can so I can kind of swirl that around to get all of that pumpkin out of there. We're going to use 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. And now for our spice mixture. We have 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a half a teaspoon of ground ginger, half a teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Now you can also use a 1 3/4 teaspoon of pumpkin spice instead of using this spice mixture, but I prefer the spice mixture over pumpkin spice. I think it gives it just a little more oomph. I'm going to take my spice mixture and add it to my sugar, just right in the bowl. I'm just going to take a spoon. You can also use a whisk if you want to, or a rubber spatula, or a fork, whatever you want to just kind of get everything mixed together. So now that we have all of that nice and combined, I'm going to set this off to the side, bring back our big old bowl, which, yes, this is the same one I used for the pie crust, because I don't want to dirty another bowl. That's more work for me. So I'm going to take 2 large eggs and crack them into our big old bowl. Oh, that is a beautiful color on that yolk. What I love about using farm fresh eggs is you can definitely tell the difference in quality. Now you can either use a whisk and do this by hand, or you can use a stand mixer or a hand mixer. I'm going to use a hand mixer. And we're going to beat our eggs. That looks about good. This Ohio stoneware bowl, I'm absolutely loving. This is the first time I've used this bowl. I'm really loving the weight of this, because with regular other plastic bowls, as soon as you put that hand mixer in there, it's gonna go flying. What I love about this is that it's so sturdy. This sucker is not going anywhere. So next we are going to add our pumpkin puree and our spice mixture. There we go. Carefully add that in, because I don't want to splash egg everywhere. There we go. A rubber spatula is very helpful for this. So again, you want to get all of that pumpkin puree out of there, because this is a pumpkin pie after all. And we want as much pumpkin in there as we can. And slowly sprinkle in our sugar and spice mixture. So before we add our milk, I'm going to stir this together. Get everything nice and combined. See, that bowl is going nowhere. And also another wonderful thing about Ohio stoneware bowls is that these are handmade. So you can definitely ensure the quality of this bowl that is going to last as long as you live, as long as your kids live, your nieces, your nephews, even your dog. It's going to outlive everybody. So this is definitely a very reliable bowl. Now that I scraped down my sides, I'm going to give it one more mix just to make sure that everything is very well combined. Now we're going to very slowly pour in our 1.5 cups of whole milk. And again, I measured my milk into my can of pumpkin, so that way the milk will kind of dissolve that pumpkin just a little bit, so that way we get every bit of pumpkin out of this can. So I'm going to turn my mixer on a very slow speed and just very slowly, bit by bit, add that milk into the bowl. So we're just adding our last bit of milk in there. Now that we have our pumpkin pie filling all mixed and ready to go, I'm gonna go grab our pie shell and we're going to get to assembly and baking. We're just going to very carefully pour this directly into the pan. I have my oven preheated to 425 degrees Fahrenheit once again. So I'm going to take our lovely assembled pie. We're going to bake it in the center rack for 15 minutes at 425. After 15 minutes is up, we are going to reduce the temperature of our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and cook for about 40 to 50 minutes. So I'm going to put this in the oven and we will be back to test to see if our pie is done. Okay, our pie is in the oven. I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes and then we will be right back. It has been 15 minutes, so I'm going to reduce the temperature in our oven from 425 degrees Fahrenheit to 350. Now that our oven is at 350, we're going to bake for another 40 to 50 minutes. So I'm going to leave mine in for about 45, then we're going to take the pie out and test it to see if it's done. So we'll see you in just a second. Now that we have about 45 minutes of time to, do whatever we want, I'm going to make some homemade whipped cream. So this is super easy and again, not as intimidating as you think it is. The ingredients you are going to need are 1 cup of heavy whipping cream, half a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar or confectioner sugar. This is going to be super simple. All we're going to do is take all of our ingredients, dump it in a bowl, and whisk it. I think I'm going to whisk this until I have about medium to firm peaks. Start off a little slow just to make sure that everything gets combined. Now that we have everything combined, we're going to crank up the speed and just let that sucker go. I think I'm going to call that good. I'm going to take my bowl and cover it with either plastic wrap, aluminum foil, or if you have a lid for your bowl, even better. So I'm going to cover this bowl and put it in the fridge and keep that cool until our pie is ready to go. It has been 45 minutes since we reduced the temperature in our oven, so now we're going to test our pie to see if it is done and ready to take out of the oven. So in order to do that, we're going to need just a simple butter knife. That looks pretty good to me. Ooh. Now that our pie is out of the oven, we're going to let this sit and cool for at least 2 hours. I'm going to leave this overnight. I'm going to let it cool for 2 hours on the stove, then immediately put it in the fridge overnight. Pie should last a few days in the fridge. I would recommend making this a day ahead if you're making this for your Thanksgiving meal. So that way it has a little bit of time to set. That is our pie all done and ready to go for your holiday events. So thank you for joining me on this journey of pie baking. You can find a link to most of the products that I used in the description below, or you can also find them at Lehmans.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more cooking videos like this. See ya!